We'll just want to thank everyone for coming. Appreciate it. And obviously, as you know, this is an open format discussion. So if you're closer in the table, then there's much more of a chance that you'll be able to participate in the conversation. And I'd like to introduce Don Lambert. We're going to be talking about the agency of intention. And take it away.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
So thanks for coming. I'm looking forward to just talking. One of the things I hope that we can gain from this is not just to really have like an argument about the role of the institution, but really just start to think about maybe starting a conversation about how artists can work with the institution so that they can partner to do things that are mutually beneficial. So I want to look at a few different practices. Going back, we can look at relational, the beginning of what was called relational art and relational aesthetics. I also want to look at land artists, Richard Long in particular. We can look at other people like Jean-Claude and Christo and some of the cooperation they had with communities that they were forced to engage to actually see these large projects through. And in particular, I'm interested though in from an artist perspective, how does an artist navigate in this culture? And the culture that I'm referring to is the art world. And when we say art world, then we're saying that we agree to some extent or another that there is an idea of an institutional theory with art. So what does that mean? That means that art is defined by institutions. Art is defined by the institution. And I want to say that because it's important to how we're talking about this. I don't believe necessarily that all art practice, in order to be valid, has to be defined by the institution. And you travel outside of Western culture, and you travel into areas that have not until more recently been sort of brought into the institution. You realize, oh wait, there's art happening all over the place that hadn't been codified by the institution. So just to give you a little background about me. I grew up north in Ohio and in the Midwest and also in Arizona. And both those places sort of framed how I work as an artist and framed my identity. My work a lot is about identity and how identity is a fluid thing. And I work through these issues in context of labor, typically. Labor is something that I understand. I was the first generation in my father's family to go to college. My mother's family, they were all professionals, but they were professional craftsmen, tradesmen. So my generation were the first to go to college. When I started examining like the building of institutions and how these affect our relationships socially, culturally, and how it affects my own production, I started understanding it in terms of labor. I come from a very diverse background. My father's family is French-German. They were like cabinet makers in the Black Forest, and my mother's family and his most recent part of the family came very recently. Well, I say that in Miami it means something different. Up north, very recently is like 100 years. In Miami, very recently is yesterday. So I'm pulling a lot of this stuff, a lot of this type of this cabinet making thing. And my mother's family, my mother's Mexican and Spanish, and the Mexican part of the family's been there forever. But the first of the Spaniards came in 1560s with Oñate, who's a conquistador who went to New Mexico. My family started a ranch there, and that ranch is still there. It's a grocery store now, but it's still there. So this idea of identity being attached to location, identity being attached to practice, identity being attached to vocation, all of these things affect how I work as an artist. And they affect the types of projects that I do. I'm a project-based artist. I'm very research-oriented in my practice. And my practice does include mostly object making because that's how I was trained and that makes sense to me. But a lot of the work that I do outside of the institution deals with or engages other populations. I've been working for about 4 years in the Amazon, in the Peruvian Amazon, with a group of Indians called the Shipibo Indians. They refer to themselves as Indians. It's not a derogatory term for them. But we've been working on building projects and sort of cross-cultural, just learning different learning from each other. I've also been working since I came to Miami in Haiti, and have been working on developing building projects there post-earthquake. So a lot of the work that I do is relational, it is social, and those things don't always go back into the gallery. They don't always go back into the institution or the format of the institution that we think of. So the reason I bring this up is because it's something that I think about every day. And I know that a lot of other artists are in that same situation where, wait a second, I have a lot of creative endeavors. There's a lot of my creative output that doesn't fit into the institution per se, or right now, or as it exists. So how can we engage with different institutes? How can we engage with the art world in a way that's meaningful, in a way that is, again, productive for both parties? So that's what we'll talk about. And really, it's a conversation. It's not a lecture. And I'm just going to show you like what I love to do in my pastime, which is to Google image search. So we're going to do some Google image searching. I already have some pre-selected, and we can just sort of march through relational aesthetics, land art, and some of these other types of institutions that have been developed by artists or for artists that are working in ways that didn't initially fit into the museum setting. Okay? All right. Is everyone good with that? We're good? There's like 3 seats right here.
Yeah, you might as well.
I'm a really friendly guy. She's a really friendly girl. All right. Okay. All right. So let's start over here. And if you looked at the flyer or the little email from Locust, you see that it talked about 2 things. It talked about entrepreneurship and social engagement, social relational practice. Entrepreneurial practice, social relational practice. These things are not like diametrically opposed. They're not binaries, but they are often sort of trying to make them fit into a human being is a difficult thing. So I want to show some different examples of what we might. When I say entrepreneurship and we think artist, we would think, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. Like Jeff Koons, yeah, he sells art and makes a lot of money. And if we understand entrepreneurship in a very basic sense as doing work to make money or doing work to generate income, then sure. But if we start to think about entrepreneurship as doing work to generate income so that you can survive, then we realize that anyone that's really engaged in commercial enterprise with their art, whether it's selling paintings for $50 or selling paintings and being able to make a really nice living off of it, is engaged in entrepreneurial practice. And so I'll throw that out to you. You can disagree with me, and we could talk about that. But I'll throw out that we are always looking, I should say I am always engaged, maybe your experience is different, in trying to negotiate between how do I make a living, how do I find success with my work financially, and how does it meet the things that are more personal and more driven internally for me? How is my work actually satisfying this desire for me to communicate? So I'm saying a few things that you might not agree with. I'm saying that art is about communication. You might not agree with that. I'm saying that there's a necessity to survive. You have to agree with that. You don't have to agree with it the same way, but you have to eat. You have to find shelter. You have to eat. And one thing I believe at the root of all this is we don't think about these things because it's too easy for us, and we don't think about survival. But if you start breaking things down, into what do I have to do, what do I want to do, and what is my art practice, and how does all that fit in there, then you can start saying, oh, okay, wait a second, I have some different choices that I can make, as opposed to these, I think, outmoded or not true ideas of, oh, the artist is either making it financially because it's good art, which are value judgments, or the artist is not making it financially because he's not making good art, or she's not making good art. The artist engaged in institutional critique, who has already, quote unquote, made it, is doing it from a standpoint of from a conceptual standpoint or from an intellectual pursuit. The artist who, like we saw recently at the Perez Museum, who is not making it, who engages in institutional critique, is a sore loser. So but we can see very quickly that there are all kinds of assumptions and judgments that we've made. We talk about good and bad, and we talk about making it and not making it. And what I'm really interested in is seeing, all right, how can we expand what art practice is? Are there areas where art practice is happening, regardless of good or bad? Are there areas where art practice is happening where the institution can engage in a new way? So that's what I'm looking for. As artists, whoever is an artist here, we can talk about, different types of practices we know. We can, as people who are involved in institutions, we can talk about, I've been reading or thinking about these things. And so there's something productive that can come out of it, as opposed to just critique. Okay. All right, Richard Long. Richard Long is this really interesting. With those who are not familiar with Richard Long is like one of the grandfathers of land art, environmental art. The work I'm bringing up was for this reason. The most powerful work to me was the work that had nothing left. Richard Long in his practice purposefully did not photograph every action. He left things in different ways. Maybe he would take a walk across the English countryside, and he would just give us a sentence saying, I took a walk across the English countryside for 10 hours, 10 days, 10 minutes. And so the way that he chose to present his work within the institution served him in a few different ways, but it served him differently than Andy Goldsworthy. Okay, I want to show you this image from Richard Long. We can talk more about any of these things, but it's only an hour and a half, so afterward would be awesome. So Richard Long literally affected the world by walking on it and creating, and the impression he made was very short-lived in the first generation of the art piece. It was an action on the ground. I choose him because where his work would go, I believe, was directly affected by his relationship to the institution. Why? Because it had to have a way to fit. It had to have a way to be consumed. Now, again, this is not like he is being abused. I think artists are complicit, and we're looking for ways to take advantage, and that's not a bad thing. I think we're all looking for ways that we can take advantage of different aspects of things of structures that are already built. All right, so I'm not making a judgment statement, but I do want to show how much his work changed from this original conception or the conceptual start of his work toward the more object-oriented place that his work now exists. Now again, it's object-oriented, it's packaged, it's sent. Packaged and sent. This is very different than having a line of text which reads, I took a walk, and I took a walk with the ebb and flow of the river Thames or something like that, right? Okay. Now, Andy Goldsworthy, why did I bring him up? Because Andy Goldsworthy is like, he used a different method. He, from the beginning, realized like, I can have an association with the institution. These things are very short-lived. They live for a few minutes, right? He spent hours trying to put these types of really what become site-specific installations together. They lasted for a moment. If you were walking your dog, maybe you got to see the first generation of the art. But everyone gets to see the pretty picture. And again, it's a good way to use the institution. How can I get my work out there? How can I show it? But it's not the same as what happened in the park, in the backcountry. It's a different thing. Richard Long, great with publishing books, coffee table books. Institutions show photographs of his work. His work exists mostly photographically when you see it in an institution. Andy Goldsworthy. Richard Long, on the other hand, he tried to take that experience that happened in a natural setting and pulled it into this type of setting. So it changes. Okay? And that's one of the things I think we can think about. Like when we move from practice that is happening out there, outside of gallery walls, outside of institution walls, when we move our practice that is happening there in the first generation, in the first order, and we bring that back into a space like this, we're not decontextualizing it. Instead we're recontextualizing it, because we're never really taking context out. Yeah.
But aren't you giving up definitional rights? I mean, I think that's really kind of one of the core issues that artists will constantly do in the pursuit of making a living, which I agree is essential. Is you give up definitional rights to the work by recontextualizing it, by making some sort of product that can be purchased, that can be traded.
So did you say definitional rights?
Yeah.
What is that?
To the notion of what it is that you're doing, that you're giving up. You're giving up what it is that you actually conceive to be your art. Body.
Through commodification of it?
Yes.
But artists do many things. There's not just one trick you pull off and that's it. And that's you.
And if he chose to bring it inside another context, then it's his free will to recontextualize, I suppose. Well, if he's forced to do it,
It's a question.
It is a question, yeah.
What is lost, I guess, maybe is a better question. What's gained, what is lost?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think that's something that someone who's been in practice for a while is going to consider.
Isn't that always lost in like the recording of conceptual art to begin with?
You could argue that, I think. Yeah. Anyone else on that?
Here's an interesting thought regarding the spiral jetty. So the DIA Foundation owns the rights to the spiral jetty in Utah. But the Utah auspices, the BLM, the whoever of the state of Utah was controlling the property where it sits. So if they had their way, they would pave the road out there, and I'll tell you it's rugged, but they would pave the road out there and they would maintain it to control the entropy, which of course is completely counter to everything that Smithson was doing. So the DIA as the institution, and it's not without its problems, but by them institutionalizing that site, they actually were acting to preserve it. So maybe that's like one weird instance where it goes in the other direction. Because if it were left to its own devices, the politics of the actual land that's the site of it would get in the way, and the entropy would happen in a different way, a bad way. It would be entropy by being built, like roads and maintenance.
Which would be totally counter to the intent of the artist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's, and the DIA does some other funny stuff, but that's maybe interesting. I don't know if that at all relates to what you're saying, but
Well, in a way it does, because once an idea has become commodified and it begins to trade hands, and you go from one collector to another collector to a museum, all of the text around it gets changed and modified, and in effect you do give up. The artist gives up definition rights. I mean, I'd like to know what Smithson would say about the wall text that would appear on museum walls about his work, and I don't know that there's any way to control that or if you want to, but
yeah, and there's no text out there at the site, which is great. I mean, it would be a whole different thing if you made a pilgrimage to a monument, and it's not a monument, it's a jetty. It's a geographic land formation, or at least it was intended to be. So you're right. I mean, like that's another way in which things become objectified for didactic reasons, but that's like a whole other. I mean, that exists outside of the market. That's a whole other complicated discussion about like intellectualizing things and trying to fit them into that mold, maybe.
What you said, what was your name again?
Kara.
What Kara said is like important, because what you said at the end was fitting things into a mold. And Amanda and I talked earlier about that. And if we could think about it in those terms, are there problems with institutions? Yeah. And do artists sometimes get really fucked over because their work because it's not happening properly, or that relationship doesn't happen? Yeah, sometimes. But do artists get major benefits from relationships with institutions that they could not otherwise have? Yes, they do. We do. And the reason it's funny that we're having this here, and it's the reason we're having it here, is because Locust Project does a pretty good job of partnering with artists to do something that's somewhat different, to do something that is at its foundation supposed to be a different type of pursuit that's not commercial. So you can engage with an institution and do it in a way that is not intentionally commercial. I'll say that with a caveat, though. I don't know how an artist can work without thinking about their brand, without thinking about themselves as a brand. And I'll throw this out there. For the artists there, who and how often have you said no to a project, to a show at a specific place because you know it will negatively affect your brand? Now, if this is just about me communicating ideas that are important to me, then you would think that expanding my audience would be more important than hurting my brand. But I don't do a lot of shows. And it's not like I don't have a lot of opportunity to do a lot of shows. And a lot of you could say the same thing. Why? Because unfortunately, I have to consider my brand. Do I like being a brand? No. My Facebook picture doesn't even look like me. I had a mustache for 1 month, and it has a mustache, and it has my whole life, and I have sunglasses on. I don't want anyone to see me. And I'm not good at branding. Today, I sent a Facebook thing out. Come today. But I don't want to be a brand. I'm a human being that is interested in cultivating things, as opposed to, as an alternative, I should say, or as an opposition to consumption. So culture is so much about consumption. My practice becomes a way for me not to be engaged in consumption. It becomes a way for me personally to be engaged in cultivation. So yeah, there are limitations to the relationship that we have as artists with institutions, but they can be mutually beneficial, and that's maybe we can continue to move there. So if anyone wants, Rodent Crater is a great one. I'm sorry, Spiral Jetty, yeah, because of ownership issues. And I had a conversation. This seems off topic, but it's not. I had a conversation maybe like 10 years ago with a friend of mine, Marvin. And we were sitting down and we were arguing, mostly because we both like to argue. And we started talking about war. And he threw something out to me. He was taking an economics course at the time, and he said, every war in the history of mankind has been an issue of economics. And I said, no, I disagree with you. I didn't understand what he was saying. When he said economics, I thought he was talking about financials. I thought he was talking about money. But if we understand economics in more of like textbook definition about supply and demand and consumption, it goes beyond money. And maybe I agree with him now much more than I did before. There is an economic root to all this. It's the reason I have that image up there on the thing, which is this Robin Crusoe economy. Robin Crusoe economy is like this. It's as simple as we can get things when we talk about economics. Throw one man on an island. He has labor, he has consumption. He will labor enough so that he can consume. And there's a balance there. You're not going to keep working once you have what you need. Right? You throw his buddy in there, and then you've created complexity into the system. Now there's supply and demand in a different way. You don't just have consumption and labor, you actually have exchange. You have economy. Right? So are we engaged in economics as art producers? Yeah, we are. So it's just like all these things, if we start thinking about it. Justin and I have been hanging out lately, talking to some little kids. And he's kind of strange. It's like, hey, kids. And I'm like, we can't talk to them like that. And
they don't know I drive a van.
Yeah, they don't know I drive a van. No, but one thing that struck me as disappointing was that, and I didn't realize this till after, that I didn't even realize I was disappointed until after the fact. After being trained as an artist for how many years, right, going through my BFA, working at my own business for 4 years between BFA, grad school, going back to grad school, came out. Not one time was there a conversation with any of my advisors about economics. Never was it said, like, how do you survive as an artist? How do you negotiate in not just an art market, but how do you negotiate in our culture, in your culture as an artist that is productive but also satisfies your needs for survival? No one ever mentioned survival. No one wants to say survival, because if you say survival, the whole idea of what? Of this lottery system mentality breaks down.
There's an artist in LA who has like she's like, I guess, a trained lawyer first, and then the whole practice is now her thing is called Get Your Shit Together. Her name is Karen Atkinson, and like that's her whole thing. It's like, and now she teaches and tries to like put your ducks in a row, and now you can be an artist for real.
Goldsmith has a course.
Get your shit together.
Goldsmith had a course on marketing yourself. There are about 10 different art schools that do that. I'm just too old for that. So.
I read today. I did a search today, and I was surprised. I was surprised to find courses actually called entrepreneurship and art. And I thought, whoa, that is. I'll tell you, that's a change. That's a change, because what is it? Why is Dia, or how is Dia rescuing? Dia's rescuing because there's a power problem. Because BLM, Bureau of Land Management, owns the property. And so this really does become an issue of economics again. It's about power, right? There are different types of power. I'm like, don't get me going on that, please. There are different types of power, though, and artists need to find ways to take power and utilize power in a way that can be effective for them. And that can happen, again, cooperatively with institutions, but it's not the status quo, I would argue. You want to look at some more stuff?
Yeah.
All right. Road and Crater, bam, power to the man. James Turrell being the man. All right? James Turrell buys a crater. You're not going to tell me what to do, BLM, because I own the crater. I'm going to spend my own money. There's those horrible billboards going around Miami right now. It says, oh, what is it? The for profit. And they're on the bus stop. And it says, my millions, my rules. Well, that's not really true. But it's true to some extent, right? And you got there's a guy sitting on piles of money, which is supposed to represent millions. And he's the guy from that show called The Shark or Shark Tank or something like that, who is, what is he? I don't know. What is he? He's an investment guy.
Who was an investment banker? Why not?
Investment banker. Let's make him an investment banker. The bane of the guy. What is he? Venture capitalist. Yeah, he's a venture capitalist. All right. But that whole idea, my millions, my rules, it's not totally true, but there's something to be said about that. James Turrell can buy a crater, and he can do what he wants with his crater. To some extent, right?
So Western.
It is so Western. Look at the dude. He's got a cowboy hat on. No one wears those. Unless you go to Texas. If you own a crater, you own a big hat. Yeah.
That's the same thing as land grabbing, though. That's what's funny, is here it's for artistic purposes, but it's the same idea. Like my land, I can do what I want. In fact, public do keep out because I'm not done with the damn thing yet. It's just a continuation of that expansionist idea. It's so funny.
Well, what about
I don't know if I go
you can
that
buy
far.
land on the moon, though? You can buy a plot of land on the moon and you get a certificate from someone? How do you know it's not already bought by somebody else?
That's a good question. I didn't know you could buy a piece of land on the moon, though. I know what I'm doing tonight.
Can we do that in the lecture? Can
We can do that now. We can buy a piece of land on the moon now if you want.
Locust Project's franchise?
Can we do that in there? We can buy a piece of land. We'll do it afterwards. We'll do it at 8:35. We're going to buy a piece of land.
Locust Crater. The Locust Crater.
Locust Crater,
What is the question here? Like, if you have the, if you're holding the cards, then you're able to create the stakes for what's important or not. So James Turrell and Michael Heitzer and all these guys who made these enormous earthworks, who many of them had their own cash and made big investments and bought these things. They create a value system. They sort of spent money to make money on their practice. I'm just throwing out some thoughts.
I think those are good thoughts to throw out. Yeah. I think maybe there's a point that happens for an entity when a power shift happens, and to recognize that is to see different possibilities again of partnership with institutions.
But sort of the interesting thing about the land artist is, speaking of like conforming to a mold or a way that things are supposed to be when you work with an institution, you're either going to try to if you're working on a project-based basis, you're going to try to make a piece that fits that mold. And these guys were like, screw the mold, I'm going to buy my own mold, I'm going to make my own thing. And sort of the scale of that was determined by themselves versus, is the idea about like, how do we create our own scales? Maybe we're not going to go off and buy our own piece of property, but how do we create our own scales for boundaries?
Bernard Clark is a perfect example of that, where he bought his little tiny bits of New York real estate that were available
Sure.
and snuck into the harbor on Hudson River.
Sure.
And
So
got his work into, he was an outlaw.
right. So in a sense, these are all projects that are resisting institutions. These are projects that are saying we do not need institutions. We are going to do our own thing. We're going to make our own stakes for.
Or maybe
they'd be a real badass though, and just steal the money and do it that way.
Well, that's a lot more interesting to me.
Why make tchotchkes?
Like who? Sorry.
Why make tchotchkes?
Why make tchotchkes?
Yeah, because to me it's more interesting when you use the institutions that are put in place. Like you said, you were going to discuss Christo and Jean-Claude, and I focused a lot when I was in school on them. And what fascinated me the most was how they used what was put in place, government institutions, financial backers, all these different things to make these works that were kind of essentially refuting the process that it took to make them, in a way.
Yeah, let's talk more about that, because Christo and Jean-Claude are a really interesting topic for this, because they definitely leverage the institution, or let's not use the institution because it's too global, but they leverage specific institutions, and particularly leverage opportunities to have financial backing, to have political leverage. Who in their right mind would let someone do this ecologically? All right, surrounded islands. Yeah, I'm going to take some vinyl and surround some islands. That's not bad, because it's pink.
And then kill some stuff.
Yeah.
Or my favorite was the umbrellas. Like, I think they killed someone in California.
Yeah. Well, right again, but these projects, because one of Christo and Jean-Claude's biggest, sort of banner statements is that they do not get anyone to pay. It does not cost. They pay for it themselves, and whether they raise the money from this source or that source, like they pay for it themselves. They raise the money through selling drawings. They do not need institutions to commission them to make these things.
I would
resistant. They are a resistant entity.
But I would argue that they use their position within institutions, or in this situation, they use their position within the art market. Mm-hmm. They leverage that. Mm-hmm. They leverage the personality to.
Well, maybe it's helpful to say institutions. Are we talking about art institutions, museums, and spaces like that? Are we talking about like corporations? Or I think we're talking more about art institutions.
Yeah.
So working beyond museums and gallery spaces.
Yeah. Let's say institutions is museums and gallery spaces for tonight.
Okay.
All right. But Jean-Claude and Christo, yeah. and we keep showing scale. We keep showing things of just giant scale. But there are other ways that we can work with the system, that artists can work with institutions, and there are other needs for artists to go outside of traditional galleries and museums. Again, the postcard that went out, digital postcard, was what? Social practice, relational practice. That's not a scale problem necessarily. It's a problem of kind. It's a different kind of thing.
And sorry to butt in, but I mean, many people in contemporary art say that the contemporary art is defined by the shift from object to context-based practices. So sort of right there, that comes with a whole mess of things to deal with. What is a context-based practice? Does that mean necessarily outside of a gallery and museum space? Is that like simply what we're dealing with, or, you know, are there other parameters to deal with?
I'm talking too much. Anyone else? So shifting from object-based practice to context-based practice.
Well, how about in your practice now? Like you're talking about going out and having these interactions, and then how do you share those projects? How does your work change when you try to share it within an institution, or you don't?
Let's look at this. This is a good example. It won't be my work. It'll be someone else's.
Okay.
All right. Relational Aesthetics 101, right? Cooking up an art experience, twice. Okay. Untitled Free. We know this piece. This is like the first time the term relational art, relational aesthetics is put out there, 1992. The piece happens. What's happening here? All these other artists are become involved. Liam Gillick, who we would not think necessarily as a relational aesthetic, a relational practicing artist now, because so much of his practice is rooted in object making. But still, Vanessa Beecroft, who you wouldn't call relational aesthetic now, you would maybe say performance. Who else showed at that show in London? What was it? Liam Gillick. Anyone? What is the show I'm thinking of?
When was it?
1994, I believe. I don't have it on here.
No.
Not Sensation.
This was a review of relational practices?
Yeah. It was yeah.
Was that like the Hayward or something? I don't know.
Sorry, guys. All right. Okay. But we know this is our first. How many pieces have we seen that involve cooking now?
Talk about Sachi. But again, you go back to Gordon Mount Clark and food, the restaurant in Soho. And actually, Rurikut Turvanja, one of his pieces was a recreation of Gordon Mount Clark's food. So it goes back pretty far.
Goes back pretty far.
It might not have been called that, but
yeah.
and probably way before that, probably something like that.
All right.
Yeah.
So here's a funny thing. So the Untitled Free show, in its initially in 1992, it involved taking the restaurant type of mode and putting it into a commercial gallery, right? And what it did for that show, the back of the gallery was brought to the front so that the gallerists and all the people working at the gallery were brought out into the exhibition area. And the artist then in the back converts what is like the working, the inside structure into a kitchen so he can make his curry. And he himself cooks the curries, feeds people the curries, has interaction with the public. Okay? We know that if we know relational aesthetics. If we've studied it a little bit, that's the first thing, that's like the first real time you start, that's the first type of thing you start talking about. Role of the institution. What happens then, and again, I don't want to demonize the institution because I love the institution. My job, half of my job would be gone if not for the institution. All of ours would. What would we be doing? Like Durer, we'd be like selling engravings from a cart. I mean, that's like the equivalent of Etsy, right? Or Pinterest or something. But what happens then when you do a retrospective and you do a redo? How does this shift in context change the way the work becomes interpreted and what the work itself is? So
that's what I mean by definitional rights. It's kind of like it becomes institutionalized. So something that starts out being a critique of the institution becomes part of absorbed by it.
okay, I think we could. That's something that becomes a critique of the institution, becomes absorbed by it, or becomes institutionalized.
Sorry. You know what was really interesting about this when we had this at the Museum of Modern Art, in one of the, actually it was a large space and they were serving the free curries and he had the whole setup and it was free, and it was free night. And Occupy, the Occupy movement came in and did a huge protest, in this free, where everything was free on
I don't
free
think this
night.
is a free piece at all.
Huh?
I think there's definitely an exchange. I don't find it as free at all. Rick to me commodified the experience. He commodified the event. And every time I see something like this, it's Rick. And he's selling a brand. He does sell objects. My clients own them. It's not
he
for
does.
free.
No, he does, and actually kind of nice. But he also has that land project in Thailand that he invites people, and it's sort of a experimental.
Isn't that part of the branding?
Sorry?
That's part of the branding.
Why do people feel
Branding, I
guilty
guess,
about calling
but,
it what it is?
Yeah, I know,
What
but
is
I
the
think to
guilt?
react against that,
I like
it's
eating.
free.
I like eating.
I mean, it's just sort of like, I just thought it was so ironic that, free food and, free, to come and target that, I think is, it's sort of like, it does become this thing to rebel against. And I think,
I'll pay if it's
I
good.
think it's kind of misdirected huh?
I said I'll pay if it's good. That word free is like so loaded. I don't find it accurate at all.
Let's read a statement from MoMA. Let's see how they market it. Okay? This landmark piece in which the artist converted a gallery into a kitchen where he served rice and Thai curry for free has been recreated at MoMA as part of the installation Contemporary Galleries 1980 to Now, on view on the second floor. This is telling. This back office curry kitchen has been replicated to scale. And the artist worked with MoMA to recreate the experience with curry prepared and served by the museum's restaurant staff daily from noon to 3 p.m.
Somebody got paid to serve that food.
And make the scale kitchen.
They had the protest there. But there were a lot of things with MoMA and a lot of sponsors and that they were protesting, but it was just sort of those.
Actually, I saw
The Claire Bishop argument is that
Right.
it's for, it's not for everyone. It's of course for like a small, it's an insular group of art world insiders that it's free for,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
But I think you hit it on the head. I saw the 92 performance, and it wasn't about the curry, strangely enough. The radical part was moving the office to the front and displacing the traditional role of the gallery. The curry was almost sad. It was pretty bad curry. I mean, it sat there.
Yeah, it was exposing sort of the workings of the machine. And I don't say machine in a negative way. Again, if when any of us in this room have our show at the MoMA, I will not protest. I will be happy, right? I mean, well, you're going to be happy, you know? Why? That's the question. Why?
Why are you happy?
Why are you happy? That's a good question. That's my wife asking the question.
All about your definition of success.
Yeah. So what are our definitions of success? That's what it comes down to. the reason we engage with any other entity, whether it's an individual or whether it's an institution, is to try and do things, is to try and accomplish some goal. Sometimes the goal is really like esoteric. Sometimes it's really narcissistic. Sometimes it's very much about trying to engage the world and affect some change. Positive. Sometimes it's about, I want to make some money.
Communication.
Both. I think for all of us, I cannot. This is what I said. Going through, being a trained artist by the institution. I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for my MFA. You can't get more institutionalized, like being in the pit of it. I loved my time there. It helped me develop a lot. But it also prepared me for a certain type of practice. Now, did it help me to be successful? No, it told me what success was, and it feeds in to this idea of a lottery mentality. What do I mean by lottery mentality? Lottery mentality means buy the ticket because it might happen for you.
Grad school.
Grad school.
No, it's your life. It's not just grad school. It's your whole life.
If you're lucky enough to keep practicing for 10 years after grad school, then you could start calling it your life. If you're lucky enough to practice for 20 years after grad school, have your debt paid off, then you can call it your life. But that's what this is like. These are some of the questions. And they're the hard questions for the artist, but they're the questions that the institution, I don't want to say the institution, they're the questions because we're complicit in the institution. We're complicit in the institution. They're questions that institutions and people that work within them don't necessarily have to deal with. When you put the inner workings and you bring it to the front, it starts to talk about exchange. It starts to talk about, this is a business venture. We start thinking about branding. You have to. I don't ever want to have to think commodity first, then communication second. And I do everything I can not to as an artist. It means that I do other things to make money.
But isn't branding an inherently commodification, an act of commodification?
Yes. It is.
So don't talk about branding.
I can't help it because I have to. I cannot exist.
You bought the Kool-Aid.
I bought the Kool-Aid.
But I mean, branding is okay. It's part of the process. It's part of everything. But you don't have to take it that far.
But wait, you talked about branding. You talked about let's talk about your Facebook page.
Sure.
There is absolutely nothing about your Facebook page that isn't your brand.
Of course it is. I cannibalize other people's images all the time.
But you're using
Other
that
people's
to say,
music.
this is what I am, this is what I am, this is what I am. Even putting your personal profile out there shows a personal branding because our society is so geared and so ready to hear, what are you about, right?
I don't think it's only for branding. I mean, wasn't able to communicate with my relatives in Venezuela during a protest. Facebook worked.
Exactly. But guess what? Now we know you have relatives in Venezuela and you care. Wow, you care.
If you care.
You're a caring guy. That's pretty cool. Or whatever else. But seriously, think about it.
I don't know. It's a chore. A lot of my friends want to go on Instagram. It's a chore.
It's a super chore. I hate it. I don't even go there anymore. But
it's so boring.
It's my brand. I can maintain it.
This is a plug for Don Lambert's Instagram page. That was branding. Right now I'm about to do some branding. I
guess my question is, why feel guilt over that brand?
There shouldn't be any guilt with that, right?
I mean, as long as you have something else.
The brand is a communication method. It's just basically, it's just a tool. And not having a brand is also a communication thing. It's like rebelling against an institution. If there's no institution, nothing to rebel against. So it's just there. It's a communication just to sum up a lot of time, a lot of things into very simple images, which is basically what the institution it's all about. It's basically sum it all up. And like when she brought up the jetty thing, it's basically like putting, like an animal in a cage in a zoo, preserve it, make it last, just make it, live longer or something, like a panda. And when they're recreating pieces, it's all about longevity, and it's all about legacy and all these things. And I feel like it all becomes all about the fear of death. Basically, just keep it living. Just keep this whole thing, and isn't that like the whole goal? Get me into a museum so this shit can live forever, or something like that, or something. Because like most people just dedicate themselves, even if you don't pay, just like get it in there and just live on its own, get repeated, or whatever.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I'm having an issue with kind of the tone of the roundtable. It seems like it's more on a tone of compliance rather than I don't know about where everyone else stands, but I think the reason we do what we do is to try to bring about some sort of change or influence.
I feel like we need to back up and talk about branding versus individual identity and expression. I think those things are getting tied together in a way that's making this conversation harder than it needs to be. I think that, because what about the people that don't give a shit or don't have a stake in branding themselves in any other way beyond just being a person and being the person that they are?
Mm-hmm.
So what if...
And you dress a certain way,
yeah,
to project something, to kind of
but everybody does that, not just artists.
Yeah, but why do they do it?
Yeah, because we're just individual people trying to make our way in the world. I don't think it's all branding.
It's not just that.
But some people don't have a stake in what they wear or what they put on their Facebook page. So
but they have a stake in what they'll do with. It doesn't have to take the form of the way you represent yourself. It could be with anything else. It doesn't have to be in that particular context.
Right.
I don't know. Nuns are concerned about the status of their piety. Everybody has some kind of status,
right?
Alarm system on them, in one way or another.
Right. Well, that's actually I just saw a thing where there's a thing that it's called Art Rank.
Oh yeah.
And basically, they've made this thing where they're looking at the top collectors' Instagram feeds, and if you get pulled up on that, hey, we just picked up this artist, then your rating and status.
Cellulator, is that the same thing?
Cellulator has turned into Art Rank.
Okay. Cellulator has turned into Art Rank?
Yeah.
Oh.
Can you say
Artrank.com instead of Cellulator.
I think it's still going as Cellulator.com, but now they're selling this service where they're basically showing you who you should buy, but it's based off of how much interest you have on Instagram and your personal brand and.
Right, it's like algorithms.
Yes. If you're trending or not trending.
Right. But basically looking at that,
The question is how much economic interest do the people run that have?
Did you just have a reaction to something?
Can we just stop there?
What was the comment that you made?
No one knows who's behind it. Looking at the list, I will promise you that there's someone with vested economic interest.
It just came out this week who is behind it.
And they have vested economic interest.
Sort of, he's like an ex-gallery owner that now has teamed up with some investors. I forgot it. Yeah.
Well, the whole kind of
tricking.
A certain amount of money. And isn't that the same relationship as the artist and the institution? In a sense that the artist, they're giving the power to the institution?
I think that's where the guilt comes from. I think we give too much power to institution, too much power to gallery.
And in this day and age, shall we be worried so much about established institutions? Aren't they changing? Flip to the side and say, don't we have the power to change it through the online and new people that are coming and dealing and curating new things besides the MoMA and the playlist? Are we going to be 10 years from now worrying that my legacy has to live in MoMA? I hope not. Is that the ultimate goal for all the artists too? I see there has to be a change. All the tools are out there to change.
And there are enough institutions funding, giving fellowships for social-based works, out of the ordinary institutions, that I don't think we need to narrow ourselves down to.
Because I don't know whether the way you opened up the roundtable discussion was your intent as well, maybe to be provocative, but this whole notion that the institution dictates everything else, as far as the institution dictates the artist, not the artist dictates the institution. So it seems like more of a roundtable based on compliance. Like, this is how we serve the institution. You know, is that what we're doing? Are we complying to the institution?
Yeah,
that's a question I would like to.
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. That's why we're all here in Locust projects. I mean, and I love Locust projects. This is one of the few places. This is one of the few places in Miami, especially in South Florida, where you can actually do work that is not engaged predominantly with commercial goal in mind, that seeks to fund. Now remember, the institution, I got pulled back when I wanted to talk about the role of the institution, but it is too much of a global, broad term. The institution does consist of galleries and museums, but we know in Miami, I've never seen a place like this. I've been here for 4 years. I have never seen a place with so many levels and layers of gallery systems that are interdependent of each other and hustling and vying for the attention of not just an art audience, not just intellectual audience, not just an informed audience, but for an audience that is looking for entertainment. Wynwood Art Walk. We see galleries close because they don't want to participate. Right? That says something. That it says something when you try to communicate with someone who is not in the know. And what is in the know then? Now we've come down to another question. We're talking about taste. This is not an objective thing. Oh, my beautiful friends, this is the beauty of it, right? We are subject to the institution. I don't agree to institutional theory of art, but I acknowledge it.
Have we tried to make, I would think that we make an effort to try to influence the institution, not necessarily comply to it.
I think that's someone else want to talk on that? I think, yeah. Can we make an effort to influence it, not comply? Yes. Can we acknowledge that there are aspects of our creative practice that are valid and good, quote unquote, that are good, that exist and cannot exist within the institution or institutions the way they are? Yes.
Yeah, because I'm very comfortable with my delusion of bringing about some sort of change within the institution, and that's the way it's been framed as far as influence is concerned, would be more desirable for me.
And so I think a lot of us, our training sort of gears us. I would suggest that the BFA to MFA direction prepares you to become an innovator within the institution. It prepares you to see success as creating new experience. See success as expanding the role of sculpture, painting, drawing, video, performance, relational, social, of things that have become institutionalized. And as long as you're not too far away from those things, then there's an ear for it. But what is the ear? The ear is the institution. Otherwise, you're outside of the institution. And you could be having successful social, relational, aesthetic, conceptual engagement outside of the institution, which means something different than inside this institution. Artist does the same thing in the MoMA, as he does in Hialeah, it means two different things because of context. Contextual shift. Object-oriented, context-oriented. Someone brought up a good point about what about this idea or the notion of democratization through internet? Well, doesn't that change the role of the institution or role of institutions with creative output? This week there's an article out about the Boston Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, whose last show was curated by tweets. Boston loves Impressionism. Is that the kind of democratization that we want? Well, listen. It's more telling in your response. Oh, no. Because, why? Because the people don't know what they need.
Or the people know what they like.
But they don't know what's good.
I didn't.
We are told that we do.
No.
We are snobs, folks.
You would have to abrogate your elite position as an artist in order to do this. And I don't think any artist is at all willing to give up the elite position, which is, I have better taste than
right. I would agree with you.
But I didn't realize that happened about a year and a half ago. Is at the Kennedy Institute, Kennedy Center for the Institute, and the Smithsonian was running popularity contests on historic cars. So it's not. It won't hurt us as much if we talk about historic cars instead of paintings, maybe. And just the kind of excitement that came about in the community, and people started coming to the museum. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to create excitement, within an institution. It's just maybe we're a little. If it's about a work of fine art, we put up a wall instead of a utilitarian object. We wouldn't be as offended if 500 school children suddenly learned about a piece of artwork that they had never seen. We wouldn't say, "Oh, that's bad." Even if the little kids didn't have good taste, they would still get to learn, and it's engaging the public. So it's not all evil. Not that we should just curate everything, but
just one, my husband wrote a book about crowdsourcing, so I'll just kick in here. I think my husband wrote a book about crowdsourcing, so I've heard a lot about it in the past 2 years. I don't agree with going to Twitter and saying, tell me your favorite, because that can be, biased. My point with the internet is you have such a gallery, you have call it more institutions or diffusion of institutions, but you have more ways for people who can curate art and communicate art to curate more artists and get more people in positions where they can be seen, shared, and followed, and bought, and sold. That's where I'm coming from, in the sense that there is an opportunity for more institutions or more democratic institutions that perhaps you wouldn't be able to get to if you're not in New York or if you're not in major centers, for you to be distributed. That's what kind of, from a broader perspective, that we don't have to wait to be picked up just for a handful of places.
But then the question is why?
What? Because
why?
But then there's
why does it matter that the institution has more so that they can get more to do more? How does that influence it?
Well, because I think I keep thinking it's does it matter? Doesn't it matter? Don't we have intrinsically a need to be recognized? I mean, is that a person? Is that what comes with an individual?
But does recognition come from the institution?
No, not necessarily. For me, it's the fact that more people see the work, and then if it's something that's organized by someone and hires some people, they're already an institution, right? So it's hard to use the word institution. I mean, there's an article this week in the New York Times about the top museums being run by men. I don't know if you guys saw it. And that's, I'm a woman. I was like, okay, my chance to just spend 75% of being a top museum. Right? So, I mean, there's other intricacies in dealing with, it's not an institution. You have to be in the right person, the right age, the right school, the right background, the right contacts. It's a lot of context and context for you to navigate the institutions besides just the work. So, as artists, then you have to be creative. How are we going to navigate? And in Miami, like you said, it's even more complex because there are fewer institutions, right?
I don't think it's necessarily complex. I would suggest that you say no a lot more if you're still interested in the game. That I think is a really snooty way to say it.
For an artist?
Yeah.
Yeah. While she was saying that, I was just going to say, it's not that you need the institutions to give you success or to give you that label or the backing of an institution. You just need to see them as another tool.
A tool, yeah.
As you should the internet, as you should the object, it's like, I feel like artists just go through these levels of like being okay with the object, being okay with the institution, and you have to take it on a case-by-case basis to where it works for your practice and it works for what you're trying to communicate and how you're trying to make the world a better place or make your life a better place, like whatever you're doing as an artist. But it's all a tool.
It's a better tool, I agree. But you need people to, because then you're doing your practice, and then you need curators, you need people to organize the shows, and I don't know if you want to take the word institution, but somewhere you work with other people that are a tool or institution. Like, it's hard to do everything. I think that's the point.
It's funny, there's also this assumption that that these things should right, if you get these people all lined up to help you and you get these tools in place, that it should like work, right?
Yeah.
But
I think Miami's point doesn't work that way.
well, I mean, I guess I would actually throw a counterpoint out, which is the considering like is the work actually good at all?
Yeah.
Well,
And then we go to the taste thing again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a good case of that is, I don't know, I'm going to maybe get butchered for saying this, but the Astor who showed here, I don't like his work, but I think he's a genius when it comes to like working and like using the system. I mean, I haven't experienced or seen, I've read about the thing he did in the Chicago projects. That's probably amazing. But a lot of what I've seen him show, I'm not crazy about. But I saw him talk in New York recently, and
Very
he
charismatic.
blew me away. And he's like, yeah, now I can go to that like 6th level of the bank that none of you guys can go to, and they'll just be like, yeah, you want like 100,000 for your project right now? Yeah, sure. Like he has that. He's gotten to that level where these tools are available.
Yeah, Theaster Gates, that's a really good example of someone who's figured out how to work with, let's not just say use, but work with the institution and institutions as tools to leverage whatever it is that he wants to do. I mean, Theaster Gates, I lived in Chicago, we lived in Chicago for a number of years. I was familiar with his work from Chicago, and you go to Chicago now, over by University of Chicago, and you realize Theaster Gates had purchased blocks of land. What's wrong with that? Theaster Gates, I appreciate his practice a lot. Ai Weiwei. There are always problems with people's practice because we're human, and none of us are perfect. And we all are inherently selfish. That's my take on it. You have to be, otherwise you die. This goes to root stuff. You have to eat. You have to find shelter. There's a level that we have to be selfish. All right, Ai Weiwei. You can see people write position papers on his practice. Okay, Ai Weiwei. The piece he did, documented 12, fairy tale. Or if we're not familiar with it, he used the opportunity to bring 1,001 people from China, closed country at the time, very closed, to become tourists at Documented 12. Did he objectify them? Well, they all wore green bracelets to show that they were part of the project. Were they able to do something that was like a fairy tale for them that they would not otherwise have been able to do? Yes. Is it without its problems? No, nothing is. Nothing's without its problems. But was he seeking to leverage the institution to affect change in individuals' lives? Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a good example of what I'm talking about. To leverage change. You're not complying with the institution. It's like go ahead.
I think they become the institution, don't you think?
No, because the institution exists it's always going to exist on a certain, it's defined at a certain point, and then the artist comes in and modifies it or influences it, and then it just changes into something else. And now we're at the age of the influence of Ai Weiwei and practice like this that didn't previously exist before.
To me, they've kind of bypassed it. Like they're the ideal in some ways.
Well, they're ideal now because you agree with it, but before, it wasn't so. It's because he had that influence, and he brought about change to a point where you agree with it. I don't know if everybody agrees with it in general, but you do. I know I do. Clearly, you do as well. So it's just a good example of an artist influencing change within an institution. They're just changing its direction. It's something that's more acceptable to you, me, and him.
Just the three of us.
I don't know if anyone else agrees. I don't want to be presumptuous.
Yeah.
How did he change the institution?
Well, it didn't. Well, before Ai Weiwei, it wasn't. I mean, the reason he's gotten so much attention is because he is doing something different.
But you said he changed the institution.
Yes.
He did something, but if you go to the next document, there's nothing to reflect that he ever showed up in the first one, in the one before. So he did something fantastic, but he didn't really change an institution.
I think that institution was also partial to that practice to begin with.
Yes, it is. You're right. I think it's a slow process too,
Sure.
and it's also very objective as well. That's why I used
I don't
you,
know. I think an
me, and
institution
him as an example of this. That's it. Not everybody's just going to be on board. Not everybody's going to drink the Kool-Aid.
As tools, and
No, of course they are. Of course they are. But
change, not change. If you need to change it, try.
I'm very optimistic about what I'm saying.
Nothing
it has
wrong
its
with
flaws, like everything else. Change is a very optimistic notion. Just to have this kind of notion that one person can influence many is a fairy tale.
I think we could make a distinction, which is like, all right, you have artists that employ an institutional critique model in their practice, like Ai Weiwei, and like Piastre, to some extent, where they're like, I'm going to get messy with the interworkings of the system. I'm going to use it for part of my practice to make the piece out of my context. And then you have artists that that don't care about that. It's not interesting to them, and then they're just simply butting up against the limitations or of the institution. So I think it's just maybe like we can make that clarification.
Yeah, let's call it a sliding scale. Because it's not like in or out. I mean, we're all negotiating. The fact that we're negotiating does one thing. It says that we agree that there are institutions of power, and that we want to have some level of autonomy, which is equivalent to power. So, why is another question, totally. But having an ability to have a voice is equated with power. You want people to hear you. No one cares. Why do we're so funny, us artist people? You can't be an artist without thinking you have something special to say. You're going to be a really sucky artist if you think you're not special. Right?
Right, and everyone's special, no one's special.
Everyone's special, no one's special. Oh, damn. But it's true. Like, who needs to hear what we have to say?
So how do you broadcast without leveraging a tool that has access to more people than you do?
You want a tool that has more access to
No,
than
see,
the
how do you
institution? Go on the news.
Well, like
No, I'm putting it out there.
Theaster was just on like national whatever. He was on the Colbert Report last week.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he basically was. He's like, I like turning ugly places into beautiful places, and that's what he's selling to the masses. And like, who's not going to get behind? Like, I want a beautiful place. Like, let's join in with this guy.
He should totally run for president.
He might be.
I'd vote for it.
Heart is warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, and don't you think though that because of the limitations, it's symptomatic on like a national and global level of how sort of oppositional the arts are to the military sports complex that's so prevalent? I mean, You know, the sports, I mean, don't you think? I mean, you know, the institutions are really fighting because there's not a lot of public support. You go to arts events here, I mean, compared to a sports event here, you know, when, you know, a sporting event, it just amazes me how many people.
How popular they are?
Yeah.
But hasn't it always been that way? I mean,
Yeah, and
Rome was that way.
funding.
Yeah.
Huge amounts
I want to see a
of
clown,
funding.
like
I
a
mean,
human head clown.
sports and,
Take some
you know,
time.
huge amounts. And the arts, I mean, so little. And I think the divisiveness is, you know, it's sort of because of that, in a way, because there's so little, you know, for these people to compete, and they're sort of pitted against each other. Do you know Harold Fletcher, this artist? Do you know? Anyway, he did a piece at the Biennial, but he talked about how capitalism,
Harold?
especially in this country,
Harold?
it sort of
Harold.
puts who?
That's not it.
We were just saying the name.
Harold Fletcher.
How it pits. He did Miranda July, Learning to Love You More, Hello There. Anyway, he did some great. He's good actually, but he just wrote in the Whitney Biennial how capitalism pits artists against each other, and I think, you know, it's symptomatic of this sort of greater situation that I think a lot of people just sort of forget about, and they, you know, it's looking at this micro instead of this big picture that's sort of sad, you know, but true. I mean, it really is, because the funding, well, you know, the institutions are getting so little funding, and Locust is really lucky they have come, but they're really, I guess, under so much pressure to balance popular taste and.
But I mean, you know, if you move the money, the audience will follow. Like, you know, we took all the money that's going into like building a stadium and then moved it over.
Well, there would be more. I mean, there would just be more.
Is the
Like,
stadium
where's
more
it go?
expensive than the Perez Museum?
There would be a lot more.
You know, like we just moved the funding. The art pit. I don't know if that's even.
Do we want to be better than football?
There's more. I mean, okay, if you grew up in suburbia, for example, if you grow up, I mean, who grew up in suburbia? Are there a lot of art museums necessarily in suburbia? It's mainly churches and strip malls and gas stations. I mean, you know. And I think education and ballpark on every, you know, ballparks, and I mean, it is a matter of education. So I think it's just symptomatic. This divisive situation is kind of symptomatic, bigger.
Are you suggesting then, just to understand and clarify, are you suggesting that the art world, we'll use that term, is at odds with popular culture production, sports being part of that? Is that what you're saying? That they're at odds or maybe in competition?
In a way, yeah. In a way.
I think there's more art now than there's ever been. Any history in time, art production is higher now.
And it's so much more popular.
More people are seeing art.
Yeah, but it's still very, in terms of, I mean, you can just look, I mean, nationwide, I mean, you can look at how much funding, you know, and because when you talk about institutions, you're talking about funding, public funding, and
sure, but think about this.
Too.
If we bring a Monet exhibition here, if you look at the type of equity you're presenting, a couple $2 billion probably. Same thing when you go to a stadium, you raise a couple $2 billion to bring those people in. It's a similar type of exchange. I mean, if we're just thinking about money, who cares? Some people like sports. Some people want to see Monets.
Well, and not just funding, but I'm talking education on sort of a national level too.
But sports
I
can
think
be
it's a
educational.
bigger-
I mean, isn't that kind of a weird statement to make?
What?
I mean, sports can be very strategic. They can forward thinking in other ways. I don't think I mean, you're comparing apples and oranges.
I'm just thinking it's so pervasive in our culture. And I think because of the shrinking art world, it sort of makes it, I mean, it is growing. I mean, it's a healthy art world, but comparatively, I think it sort of has a divisive effect on people.
I got to throw this out. I believe the art world is increasing, and it's in part due to the quasi petite bourgeoisie, which has become the middle class art producer.
All right.
Agreed.
All right.
All right?
The middle class art producer?
Yeah, man.
Consumer.
No, producer.
Producer.
Including magnet schools.
Including magnet schools.
Damn those kids.
Damn those kids.
Coming in here taking
One of
our
them's
jobs.
back here. One of them. All right. Part of my creative practice is education. It's not separate from my creative practice. It's part of it because my creative practice is rooted in communication. Is there a place for education within galleries? Yeah. We're all educating each other here, hopefully. Right? A little bit, maybe. Yeah. But hopefully we're not getting dumber. All right. So there's lots of cultural production. And to think that we have the highest and best use of cultural production as art practitioners is not necessarily. I don't think you can quantify or qualify that. There's lots of culture that is being produced that is not just valid but necessary for society to be stable and healthy. Art happens to be part of it. But you need sciences, you need education broadly, you need other distractions and ways to see strategy played out. You need all that stuff. I think one of the reasons we could maybe make an argument that artists are pitted against each other because of this capitalist enterprise maybe has less to do with capitalism and more to do, because I don't think capitalism is inherently bad.
No,
I like making $1 and giving the gas station $1.
Aren't you glad the Cold War's back?
Yeah, that'll help capitalism. Think of like the military. But what can be more problematic than seeing possibilities? And I don't like capitalism hardly at all. So for me to say capitalism is not bad is just my wife's like, what? So what are all these last dinners for the last 15 years? So
like free market.
But let's say that there is a problem in seeing art world as an economy that's zero sum. And I think when you see it that way, you can say, oh yeah, if this institution gets the funding, then I'm not going to get it. If this artist gets the show, and there are only 12 slots a year, then I'm not getting the show. To see things in a zero-sum way creates maybe, and this depends on your point of view, maybe unhealthy competition, maybe healthy competition. Is everyone deserving of the 12 slots? Someone's got to say.
And the reality is, like, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about, like, the job I do, and it's like, oh yeah, there are people that can present themselves in a very slick way, and wow, that looks shiny and good. They must be good. And it comes, these things come across my desk, and I see them. But I know from experience that just because the presentation is shiny doesn't mean the content or the work is going to be there. But those people do get a better chance if they're more business-like sometimes in the institution. If they can present themselves in a more organized manner, yes, they get the grant and you don't. So things like that are reality too in the institution.
Or relational. Michelle Grabner was one of the people putting the Whitney Biennial together, and I know Michelle from SAIC, and of course the first thing SAIC did was to put out their list of people involved with the Whitney Biennial. Why does that happen? Relational. When I own my own business I still own my own business. Can we just say that? As artists, we own our own business? When I was working in a different business enterprise, and I needed to work with someone, and when I've been hired by someone else, when my wife, who works in human resources, whose job is to hire people, you can't take all the candidates. This is a hard job to be a curator. It's a hard job to be involved in that aspect. There's no way you can screen everything, consider everything. It becomes counterproductive. So when we all do that, though, I look for the best fruit and vegetables at my Publix. I don't go to 5 Publix to find a better head of lettuce. I go, there's a diminishing return. Relational practice that's not called relational art practice, relational practice that we're all engaged in, that I like to talk about in my work, considers that, acknowledges that, and says, well, what can we do with that? Someone asked, how does a work change? And how does it change by definition when it goes from the artist to the collector, to another collector, to an institution? I have an answer. I have this project that I've been using specifically for those situations. Institutions, as you know, you have a show at a museum, you get honored with the request to give a piece for free. So, and it is an honor, and it's also giving work for free. So what do? Well, my approach was to make that exchange part of the piece. So the person gets the piece, but they have to understand that that exchange is the equivalent of me being the explorer, sending the goods back to my patron in Rome. And that exchange becomes part of the piece and integral. And every other exchange becomes part of that piece. Am I upset that I've been asked to give a piece for free? I don't have to. I know that I'm going to get something out of it. I'm complicit. Why? Because it's beneficial. It's mutually beneficial. Do I do it every weekend? No. Because sometimes you find you're giving more things away for free and you're not bringing anything in. And again, that goes back to the economics thing. How much can I produce? How much can I labor as an artist? How much can you labor as an artist and do it for free? It becomes again an issue of diminishing returns. So if you want to look at that, you want to combat a practice that is engaged with diminishing returns, find a way to work outside of the system or to work with the system or a combination of both. And I think that's the beauty of where we are today. Democratization, I don't know, maybe. But I'll tell you one thing. The almost endless cycle of art fairs has shifted power from bricks and mortars galleries to a traveling venue. It has shifted power. You can read numerous articles about it.
Return to the Middle Ages. That's exactly what they did. The art fairs went from city to city.
We have to talk later. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I've got a subject to talk about with you. But what is it? There was a thing. In the Middle Ages, gentry, part of their rite of passage was to go from city to all the important centers to see the important cultural things. In England, when England had a split with the continent, they couldn't go to the continent, so they created their own places. And what came out of that? The picturesque. picturesque movement in art. This idea of creating, of objectifying, of commoditizing, of creating cultural value with travel, with ruins, with the beauty of a ruin with paupers in the front. All of this stuff that you couldn't get in Europe, continental, well, they recreated it. They found a new place to go. Right? And we have that. A buddy of mine, really good friend, artist working out in Los Angeles, is telling me about the fair that happened at about a month ago at
LA Art.
The airplane hangar?
No, the one that happened at the old cowboy town.
Right.
The ranch.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And he starts telling me, oh, no, that's something, man. He's like, that's happening. Yeah. And I said, and I told him, I didn't say this, but I wanted to. I said, it's not creating a contextual shift that makes some magnitudinal change or some drastic thing to the art practice. It's creating a different buying experience. But with a different buying experience come different rules and different ways to engage and all that stuff. So yeah, I think there will be opportunities, but I don't think any of us want pure democratization. We don't want that within the art practice because we don't want that within our own country politically. I'll argue about that.
Just a question on democracy. My point was more like you have, it's still going to, not full democracy, not like a free market in which you like the exact number of demand and supply. I'm just saying a democratization in the sense that there could be 5 MoMA institutions equivalent that you could be interacting with in different aspects, not only one. Access to more curator, access to more people that you can work with and fund projects that are easier to find as opposed to what it is now. That's just what I meant by democratization. Which is happening, I think, a lot.
I'm going to throw these up real fast. Center for Land Use Interpretation, an institution that was created for a different type of work. If you're not familiar with it, you might be interested in looking it up. Andrea Zattel, with her Institute of Investigative Living. Right? Artists and artists organized, creating different types of institutions. And again, I agree. I see institution as a tool, not a tool to be used. So maybe tool's not the right word for me. I see institutions as potential partners. And you have good dance partners and bad dance partners. I want some good dance partners to dance with. That's what I want, because I like dancing. And all the other ones, though, do whatever, right?
Go to the bathroom, dish them.
Go to the bathroom, dish them.
It's a learning experience.
It's a learning experience.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Feel free to hang out. Thank you.
Yeah.